The fluorescent lights of Chen's corner store hummed their familiar tune as 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez skipped down the candy aisle, her pink sneakers squeaking against the worn linoleum floor. It was 8:47 p.m. on a warm September evening in the small Texas town of Millbrook, and Emma had convinced her mother, Maria, to stop for ice cream after her soccer practice. The store smelled like it always did, a comforting mixture of coffee, cleaning solution, and the faint sweetness of penny candy that Mr. Chen kept in glass jars near the register. "Chocolate or strawberry, Mija?" Maria called from the freezer section, her voice warm with affection. She'd promised Emma a treat for scoring her first goal that afternoon, and nothing made Maria happier than seeing her daughter's gap-toothed smile. "Both," Emma giggled, reaching for a pack of gummy bears from the bottom shelf. Mr. Chen always let her have extra gummy bears when her mother wasn't looking, slipping them into their bag with a conspiratorial wink. He was like a grandfather to half the kids in Millbrook, a fixture in the community for over 30 years. Mr. Chen stood behind the counter, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he sorted through the evening lottery tickets. At 68 years old, he moved a little slower than he used to, but his smile was as bright as ever. "Emma score big goal today," he called out in his accented English, having heard the news from another customer earlier. "Very proud." Emma beamed, about to run over and tell Mr. Chen all about her game when the door chime rang. But this wasn't the gentle ding of a regular customer. The door exploded inward with such force that the glass panel cracked, sending spiderweb fractures across its surface. Everything happened in seconds, but for Emma, time seemed to stretch like taffy. A man burst through the entrance, his face covered by a black ski mask, his frame towering and menacing. He wore a torn leather jacket covered in patches and studs, dark jeans, and heavy black boots that thundered against the floor. But what Emma noticed most, what her young mind captured with horrifying clarity, was the spider tattoo that crawled up the left side of his neck, its legs reaching toward his jaw like it was alive and climbing. "Everybody down, now!" The man's voice was a roar that seemed to shake the very walls. In his right hand, he wielded a silver handgun that gleamed under the harsh store lights. Maria's scream pierced the air, a sound of pure terror that Emma had never heard from her mother before. "Emma!" Maria dove toward her daughter, but they were on opposite ends of the store, separated by rows of merchandise and mounting horror. Mr. Chen's hands went up immediately, trembling in the air. "Please, please, take money, take everything. Please, no trouble." "Shut up!" The masked man vaulted over the counter with frightening agility, slamming Mr. Chen against the cigarette display behind him. Packs scattered across the floor like playing cards. "Open the register, move." Emma froze behind the candy aisle, her small body pressed against the metal shelving. The gummy bears fell from her hands, the package hitting the floor with a soft rustle that seemed deafening in her ears. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She wanted to run to her mother, wanted to scream, wanted to close her eyes and make it all disappear. But she couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. Mr. Chen's shaking fingers fumbled with the register keys. I open, please, I have grandchildren." "I said move faster." The masked man's patience evaporated. When Mr. Chen's arthritic hands couldn't move quickly enough, the attacker's rage exploded. He grabbed Mr. Chen by the collar and hurled him sideways. The elderly man crashed into the lottery ticket display, glass shattering everywhere. Then Emma saw the blood. So much blood. It bloomed across Mr. Chen's white shirt sleeve, spreading like spilled wine. He'd fallen onto the broken glass, his arm badly gashed. Mr. Chen cried out in pain, a sound that would echo in Emma's nightmares for weeks to come. "No, no, no," Maria whispered, finally reaching Emma and pulling her daughter behind the counter on the customer side, shielding her with her own body. But Emma's eyes remained locked on the horrific scene. She saw everything. Her young mind, still so pure and innocent just minutes before, was now recording every detail with photographic precision. The attacker grabbed fistfuls of cash from the register, stuffing bills into his pockets. "You tell the cops anything, old man, and I'll come back. You hear me? I said, do you hear me?" He kicked the counter, his boot leaving a muddy print. Mr. Chen nodded weakly from the floor, clutching his bleeding arm, his face pale with shock and pain. The masked man's head suddenly swiveled toward where Emma and Maria hid. For one eternal second, his eyes, cold, dark, empty eyes, locked onto Emma's. The spider tattoo seemed to pulse on his neck. Emma could see a scar through his mask, running down his left cheek. She could smell him, cigarettes and something chemical like gasoline. Then he ran. The door chime rang again as he disappeared into the September night, leaving destruction in his wake. Maria grabbed her phone with shaking hands, calling 911 while keeping Emma pressed against her chest. "Please, we need help. Chen's Corner Store on Main Street. There's been a robbery. Someone's hurt. Please hurry." But Emma didn't cry, didn't scream. She just stared at the blood pooling on the linoleum floor, at kind Mr. Chen, who always gave her extra gummy bears, now crumpled and hurt. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The police arrived in 4 minutes, Officer Davis first, then Detective Sarah Mitchell, then the paramedics. They wrapped Mr. Chen's arm, loaded him onto a gurney, asked Maria questions. Someone gave Emma a teddy bear from the patrol car. Someone else tried to coax words from her lips. But Emma Rodriguez didn't speak. Not that night, not the next day, not for 3 long weeks that followed. The trauma had stolen her voice, locking it away in some deep, dark place where the spider tattoo man couldn't reach it, where she felt safe in her silence, where words couldn't bring him back to hurt her, or her mother, or Mr. Chen. The investigation stalled. Other witnesses gave conflicting descriptions. The security camera had been broken for months. Without Emma's testimony, without her identifying the suspect from a lineup, the case would crumble. And a dangerous man would walk free. Detective Sarah Mitchell sat at her desk in the Millbrook Police Department at 2:17 a.m., surrounded by cold coffee cups and case files that seemed to mock her with their incompleteness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the evidence photos spread before her. 3 weeks had passed since the robbery at Chen's Corner Store, and they were running out of time. Sarah rubbed her tired eyes, the weight of the case pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. She'd been a detective for 12 years, had solved dozens of cases, but this one was different. This one had a face, a little girl's face, frozen in trauma and silence. The suspect, a 34-year-old man named Marcus Spider Dalton, sat in county lockup awaiting trial. They'd arrested him 2 days after the robbery based on his distinctive neck tattoo and a tip from an informant. His jacket had been found dumped in a creek bed, Mr. Chen's blood still on the sleeve. His fingerprints matched partials lifted from the store counter. The evidence was solid, but not solid enough without eyewitness testimony. And Marcus Dalton had an expensive lawyer who was already poking holes in their case. Sarah flipped open the file on Emma Rodriguez for the 100th time. The photographs showed a bright-eyed little girl with dark braids and a soccer jersey, smiling at the camera before the robbery. The after photos, taken during the attempted interviews, showed a different child entirely. Hollow-eyed, pale, her mouth pressed into a thin line of silence. "She saw everything," Sarah muttered to the empty room. "She's the only one who can put him away." The other witnesses had been nearly useless. Mrs. Patterson, shopping for cat food, had been too nearsighted to see details. College student Jake Morrison had been outside pumping gas, only hearing the commotion. The clerk from the pharmacy next door had glimpsed someone running but couldn't make a positive identification. Mr. Chen himself had been too focused on survival to note specific features beyond tall man, angry, masked. But Emma had been there. Emma had seen his face when the mask slipped. Emma had been close enough to count the legs on his spider tattoo, to see the scar beneath his eye, to hear every word he'd shouted. Emma held all the answers, trapped inside a mind too traumatized to share them. Sarah pulled up the witness interview videos on her computer, watching them again even though she'd memorized every painful second. The child psychologist, Dr. Patricia Gomez, sat across from Emma in a child-friendly interview room with soft chairs and colorful toys. Emma's mother held her hand, tears streaming silently down Maria's face. "Emma, can you tell me what you saw at the store?" Dr. Gomez asked gently, her voice warm and patient. Emma stared at her lap, silent. "It's okay, sweetheart, you're safe now. The bad man can't hurt you." Emma's fingers tightened around her mother's hand, still silent. "Can you draw what you saw? Sometimes drawing is easier than talking." Emma picked up a crayon, black, and drew a single image, a spider. Then she dropped the crayon and shook her head violently, tears finally coming. The interview had ended there. Sarah closed the video, frustration mixing with heartbreak. They'd tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, multiple gentle interview attempts with different specialists. Maria reported that Emma still wasn't speaking at home either, communicating only through nods, head shakes, and the occasional written note. She'd stopped going to school, stopped playing soccer, stopped being the vibrant little girl she'd been before that September night. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for next week. If Emma couldn't testify, the judge would likely dismiss the case for lack of evidence. Marcus Dalton would walk free. He'd strike again. Sarah knew his type. The violence would escalate. Someone might die next time. "There has to be a way," Sarah whispered, pressing her palms against her tired eyes. From beneath her desk came a soft woof of acknowledgement. Sarah looked down to see her K9 partner, Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with intelligent brown eyes and a coat of black and tan fur. He'd been lying quietly at her feet for hours, as he always did during late-night casework. "What do you think, boy?" Sarah asked, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "How do we help a little girl find her voice?" Rex tilted his head, his ears perking forward with that characteristic attentiveness that made him such an exceptional police dog. He'd been her partner for 3 years, trained in both patrol work and narcotics detection. But Rex had another talent, one that wasn't part of his official job description. He was magic with kids. Sarah remembered the department's community outreach event last summer. They'd set up in the park, showing off the K9 unit, letting children meet the dogs. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, had wandered over to their station. He was small for his age, withdrawn, clutching his foster mother's hand. The social worker explained he'd been removed from an abusive home and hadn't spoken since his rescue 3 months earlier. Rex had approached the boy slowly, sitting down and simply waiting. The child had stared at the dog for a long moment, then tentatively reached out to touch Rex's fur. And then, miracle of miracles, the boy had whispered, "Nice doggy." His foster mother had burst into tears. Those were the first words he'd spoken in 90 days. Sarah sat up straighter, her detective's mind suddenly racing. Rex had a gift for reaching traumatized children in ways that human adults couldn't. There was something about his calm presence, his non-judgmental acceptance, his warm fur and patient eyes that bypassed the walls trauma built around young minds. "Rex," Sarah said slowly, an idea forming, "what if you could help Emma?" Rex's tail began to wag, sensing his partner's shift in energy. Sarah knew it was unconventional, unprecedented even. Service dogs had been used in courtrooms before, but typically for adults with PTSD or anxiety disorders, and usually only after extensive legal battles. Using a police K9, an active duty dog to help a child witness testify, that would require judicial approval, psychological evaluation, and probably a minor miracle. But they were out of options, and Sarah had seen what Rex could do. She glanced at the clock. 2:43 a.m. Too early to call anyone, but too late to sleep now. Sarah pulled out a legal pad and began drafting her proposal, outlining the research on courthouse facility dogs, the success stories from other jurisdictions, the specific ways Rex's presence might help Emma break through her traumatic silence. Rex laid his head on Sarah's foot, a gesture of solidarity and support. "We're going to help her, boy," Sarah promised, typing furiously. "We're going to give that little girl her voice back, and we're going to put that monster away where he belongs." By 6:00 a.m., Sarah had a 15-page proposal complete with research citations, legal precedents, and a detailed plan. She showered and changed in the station locker room, put on her most professional suit, and waited impatiently for 8:00 a.m. when Judge Robert Harrison's chambers would open. Judge Harrison was old school, a stern, by-the-book judge who'd been on the bench for 30 years. He didn't tolerate nonsense, didn't appreciate innovation for innovation's sake, and ran his courtroom with military precision. Convincing him to allow a German shepherd into his sacred space would be like convincing a cat to swim upstream. But Sarah had to try. At 8:03 a.m., she stood outside Judge Harrison's chambers, her proposal clutched in one hand, Rex's leash in the other. She'd brought Rex deliberately, knowing the judge would need to see him, to understand that he wasn't just any police dog. Sarah took a deep breath and knocked on the heavy oak door. "Come in," came the gruff response. This was it, their last chance, Emma's last chance. Sarah pushed open the door and stepped inside, Rex walking calmly at her side, ready to work another miracle. Judge Robert Harrison looked up from his morning briefing with an expression that could freeze water. He was a large man, 62 years old, with silver hair, thick eyebrows, and a face that had been carved by decades of hearing humanity's worst stories. His chambers reflected his personality: dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and not a single personal photograph or decoration to soften the austere atmosphere. "Detective Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "I don't recall scheduling a meeting with you, and I certainly don't recall inviting a dog into my chambers." Sarah stood straighter, refusing to be intimidated. Rex sat perfectly at her side, his posture professional and calm despite the tension radiating from the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the intrusion, but I need 5 minutes of your time. It's about the Chen's Corner Store case, about Emma Rodriguez." Judge Harrison's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been sympathy. He'd read the case file. He knew about the traumatized child who couldn't speak. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to the chair across from his massive desk. Sarah sat. Rex remained standing, his eyes alert but his demeanor unthreatening. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah made her case with the passion of someone who truly believed in what she was proposing. She walked Judge Harrison through the research, the success stories from other states, the psychological principles behind animal-assisted therapy. She explained Rex's training, his certifications, his temperament. She showed videos on her tablet of Rex working with children at community events. Judge Harrison listened in silence, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his face unreadable. "Your Honor," Sarah concluded, leaning forward with desperate earnestness, "Emma Rodriguez has answers locked inside her. She saw everything. She can identify Marcus Dalton definitively, but the trauma has stolen her voice. Rex has helped children like Emma before. He can reach her where we failed." "This is highly irregular," Judge Harrison finally spoke, his tone still skeptical. "My courtroom is not a petting zoo, detective. It's a place of law and order." "With respect, Your Honor, it's also a place of justice. And without Emma's testimony, a violent criminal walks free. Isn't that worth being a little irregular?" Judge Harrison studied Rex for a long moment. The German shepherd sat now, perfectly still, his intelligent eyes meeting the judge's gaze without aggression or fear. There was something undeniably noble about the animal, something that spoke of discipline and purpose. "One meeting," the judge finally said, his voice rough. "Arrange a meeting between your dog and the child. If, and this is a significant if, the psychologist and the child's mother approve, and if the child responds positively, then we'll discuss the possibility of courtroom accommodation. But I'm making no promises, Detective." Sarah felt hope surge through her chest. "Thank you, Your Honor. You won't regret this." "I already regret it," Judge Harrison muttered, waving her away. "Now get that animal out of my chambers before someone sees and thinks I've gone soft." 3 days later, in a quiet conference room at the Millbrook Community Center, Emma Rodriguez sat in a child-sized chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. Maria sat beside her daughter, dark circles under her eyes from weeks of sleepless nights. Dr. Patricia Gomez, the child psychologist, stood near the window, her expression hopeful but cautious. Sarah Mitchell stood by the door with Rex, waiting for the signal to enter. "Emma Mija," Maria said softly in Spanish, then switching to English. "There's someone special here to meet you. He's a friend. He helps people who are scared. His name is Rex." Emma didn't respond, didn't even lift her head. Dr. Gomez nodded to Sarah. "Bring him in, slowly." Sarah opened the door wider and gave Rex the hand signal to heel. They entered the room with measured steps, Rex's nails clicking softly against the linoleum floor. Sarah had deliberately left his police vest at the station, not wanting the official markings to trigger Emma's trauma. Today, Rex wore only his collar and leash, looking more like a family pet than a working K9. Emma's head lifted slightly at the sound of the dog's approach. Her eyes widened, not with fear but with something else, curiosity perhaps, or recognition of something safe in a world that had become terrifying. Rex stopped about 6 feet away from Emma, sitting without being commanded. He'd done this before, Sarah realized. He understood on some instinctive level exactly what was needed. His ears were forward but relaxed. His tail gave one slow, gentle wag. His mouth was closed, non-threatening. Everything about his posture said, "I'm here, I'm safe, I'm your friend." The room held its collective breath. Emma stared at Rex. Rex stared back, patient and unwavering. 1 minute passed, then 2. Sarah's legs ached from standing so still, but she didn't dare move, didn't dare break whatever invisible connection was forming between the traumatized child and the therapy dog. Then Emma's hand moved, just slightly. Her fingers uncurled from her lap, extending a few inches toward Rex, then pulling back, testing, wondering. Rex remained perfectly still, letting Emma set the pace, make the choices, control the interaction. Emma's hand moved again, this time extending further. Her small body shifted forward in the chair, leaning toward Rex. Still, she didn't speak, but her breathing had changed, less shallow, less panicked. "It's okay, sweetheart," Maria whispered, tears already forming in her eyes. "You can touch him, he's a good boy." Emma stood slowly, her movements tentative like a deer approaching water. She took one step toward Rex, then another. She was close enough now to touch him, but her hand hovered in the air, trembling with uncertainty. Rex did something remarkable then. He lowered his head slightly, making himself smaller, less imposing. He let out the softest woof of greeting, barely audible, a sound of pure gentleness. That sound broke through Emma's final hesitation. Her small hand descended and made contact with the soft fur on top of Rex's head. The moment her fingers touched him, Emma gasped. An actual sound, the first non-crying vocalization she'd made in 3 weeks. Rex leaned ever so slightly into her touch, encouraging her, accepting her. Emma's other hand came up, and then both hands were on Rex's head, in his fur, feeling the warmth and solid reality of him. Her face transformed, the mask of trauma cracking just a little. A tear rolled down her cheek, then another, but these weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief. Maria covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing silently. Dr. Gomez scribbled notes frantically, documenting what might be a breakthrough. Emma sank to her knees in front of Rex, wrapping her thin arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. And Rex, professional, disciplined, trained police dog Rex, did something he'd never done on duty. He carefully, gently lowered himself to lie down on the floor, making it easier for the little girl to hold him. Emma clung to Rex like he was a life raft in a storming sea. Her small body shook with silent sobs, releasing weeks of pent-up terror and grief into the safety of his warm fur. Sarah had to look away, overwhelmed by the raw emotion in the room. She'd hoped Rex could help, but this was something beyond her expectations. After several minutes, Emma's crying subsided. She didn't let go of Rex, but her breathing calmed. Her grip relaxed from desperate to comfortable. She stayed there on the floor, holding the dog who had somehow communicated in ways humans couldn't. "You're safe. I'm here. You're not alone." Dr. Gomez knelt down slowly, maintaining distance but making herself available. "Emma," she said softly, "Rex is pretty special, isn't he?" Emma nodded against Rex's fur, an actual response. "Would you like Rex to be with you when you talk about the scary things?" Emma nodded again, more vigorously this time. "Do you think you could talk if Rex was there to listen?" Emma pulled back just enough to look at Rex's face. She studied him with intense concentration, as if reading something in his brown eyes that adults couldn't see. Then, in a whisper so quiet it was almost imagined, she said, "Rex." Just his name, one word, but it was a word, a sound, a crack in the wall of silence. Maria Rodriguez dropped to the floor beside her daughter, wrapping both Emma and Rex in her arms. "Yes, baby, Rex, he's going to help you. He's going to be your friend." Emma looked up at her mother, and for the first time in 3 weeks she smiled. Small, tentative, fragile, but real. Sarah Mitchell wiped her own eyes quickly, maintaining her professional composure even as her heart soared. This was it. This was the breakthrough they needed. Judge Harrison would have to listen now. The Jefferson County Courthouse stood imposing against the gray October sky, its stone columns and marble steps representing everything Marcus Spider Dalton feared: justice, accountability, consequences. Inside courtroom 3B, nearly 50 people crowded into the gallery, their whispers creating a low hum of anticipation. News of the police dog witness had spread through Millbrook like wildfire, drawing reporters, curious citizens, and courthouse regulars who sensed they were about to witness something unprecedented. Emma Rodriguez sat in the hallway outside, her small hand clutching her mother's with fierce intensity. She wore her best dress, navy blue with white flowers, and her hair was braided neatly by her abuela that morning. But despite the careful preparation, Emma's face was pale, her eyes darting nervously toward the courtroom doors. Detective Sarah Mitchell crouched beside Emma, Rex sitting calmly at attention. "Remember what we practiced, Emma. Rex will be right there with you. You're not alone." Emma nodded, her free hand reaching out to touch Rex's head for reassurance. Over the past week, she'd spent hours with Rex, gradually speaking more, first to the dog, then to her mother when Rex was present, then finally to Dr. Gomez and Sarah. Her voice was still soft, still hesitant, but it was returning. The spider tattoo man's power over her was weakening, one word at a time. Inside the courtroom, Marcus Dalton sat at the defense table wearing an ill-fitting suit that couldn't hide the menace in his eyes. His attorney, Marcus Webb, no relation, he always made sure to clarify, was a shark in expensive clothes, known throughout Texas for getting guilty men acquitted on technicalities. Webb shuffled through his papers with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez sat across the aisle, her stomach churning with anxiety. This case should have been straightforward, clear evidence, a reliable witness, a dangerous criminal. But nothing about this trial had been straightforward. Everything hinged on whether Judge Harrison would allow that dog into his courtroom, and whether a traumatized 7-year-old could hold together under Webb's cross-examination. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed. "The Honorable Judge Robert Harrison presiding." Judge Harrison entered with his characteristic stern expression, his black robe flowing behind him like a cape of authority. He took his seat at the bench, surveying the packed courtroom with evident displeasure. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice brooking no nonsense. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Martinez stood immediately. "Before we begin jury selection, we have a preliminary matter regarding witness accommodation for a minor." "I'm aware, Counselor." Judge Harrison's face revealed nothing. "Mr. Webb, I assume you've been briefed." Marcus Webb shot to his feet like a rocket. "I have, Your Honor, and I must strenuously object to this circus before it even begins." His voice carried theatrical outrage. "The prosecution wants to bring a police dog, a German shepherd in full police regalia, into this courtroom to sit with their witness. This is blatantly prejudicial." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Judge Harrison's gavel cracked once. "Order." "Your Honor," Webb continued, warming to his performance, "my client has the constitutional right to a fair trial. Having a police dog, a symbol of law enforcement authority, sitting beside the prosecution's witness sends an unmistakable message to the jury. This child needs protection from my client. It presumes guilt before a single word of testimony is heard." Martinez stood. "Your Honor, K9 Rex is a certified service animal specifically trained for witness support. He wears no police vest in the courtroom, carries no symbolism of law enforcement. This is about allowing a traumatized child to testify, which is her right and the state's interest in seeking justice. The child's trauma, while regrettable, doesn't override my client's Sixth Amendment rights," Webb shot back, his face reddening. "This is emotional manipulation, Your Honor. The defense moves to exclude the animal entirely." Judge Harrison held up one hand, silencing both attorneys. "Counselors, approach the bench, now." Martinez and Webb moved forward for a sidebar conference. The court reporter adjusted her position to capture their hushed but heated exchange. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "Mr. Webb, I've reviewed the case law. Multiple jurisdictions have allowed facility dogs for vulnerable witnesses. This isn't unprecedented." "Your Honor, those cases involved service dogs, not active duty police K9s. This animal probably arrested people last week. The jury will see it as an extension of law enforcement." Martinez interjected. "Rex won't be visible to the jury. We propose a partial screen." "A screen?" Webb exploded, then caught himself, lowering his voice. "Now we're hiding witnesses. How is my client supposed to face his accuser if she's behind a screen with a police dog?" "The child will be fully visible to your client, to you, and to the court," Martinez explained tightly. "Only the jury's view will be partially obstructed. They'll see Emma, hear her testimony, but won't see Rex. This addresses your prejudice concerns." Judge Harrison leaned back, his fingers drumming on the bench. 29 years, 11 months, and 16 days he'd been a judge. In 3 weeks, he would retire to his cabin in the mountains, tend his garden, and never think about legal precedents again. But not today. Today, he had to decide whether to break with tradition or potentially silence a child who'd already been victimized. "Your Honor," Webb pressed, sensing hesitation, "if you allow this, every witness in every trial will suddenly need an emotional support animal. Where does it end? Dogs today, therapy horses tomorrow. This opens a Pandora's box of—" "Mr. Webb," Judge Harrison interrupted, his patience wearing thin, "I'm fully capable of understanding slippery slope arguments. What I need to understand is whether your concern is legitimate prejudice or simply making the prosecution's job more difficult." Webb's jaw tightened. "My concern is my client's constitutional rights." "And mine," Martinez countered, "is a 7-year-old victim getting to tell the truth about what she witnessed. Without Rex, Emma can't testify. She's tried. She freezes. The trauma steals her voice. Is that justice, Your Honor? Letting a violent criminal walk free because his victim is too scared to speak? Judge Harrison closed his eyes briefly. He thought about his own granddaughter, just a year younger than Emma. He thought about 30 years of seeing victims re-traumatized by the very system meant to protect them. He thought about the letter of the law versus the spirit of justice. "Here's my ruling," he said finally, opening his eyes. "The dog may be present, but under strict conditions. First, K9 Rex wears no police identification of any kind. Second, a partial screen shields him from the jury's view while leaving the witness fully visible. Third, the dog must remain stationary and silent. Any disruption results in immediate removal. Fourth, I'll give a limiting instruction to the jury explaining the accommodation is for the witness's medical needs, not a reflection on the defendant." "Your Honor, I must object for the record," Webb started. "Your objection is noted and will be preserved for appeal, Mr. Webb. My ruling stands." Judge Harrison's tone left no room for argument. "Ms. Martinez, bring in your witness and her support animal. Let's see if this unprecedented arrangement actually works." Webb returned to the defense table, whispering urgently in Dalton's ear. The defendant's expression darkened, his hands clenching into fists on the table. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Sarah Mitchell entered first with Rex, the dog's demeanor calm and professional despite the dozens of eyes watching. Behind them came Emma, holding her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The courtroom collectively held its breath as the small girl walked down the center aisle. Her steps were tiny, hesitant, but she kept moving forward. Rex walked slightly ahead, as if clearing a path for her, his presence a shield against the overwhelming attention. A wooden screen, hastily constructed over the lunch break, stood beside the witness box. It was positioned to block the jury's view of where Rex would sit, while leaving Emma fully visible to everyone else in the courtroom. Emma climbed into the witness box using the step stool provided. She looked impossibly small in the adult-sized chair, her feet dangling a foot above the floor even with the booster seat. Her eyes immediately found Rex, who had positioned himself just behind the screen, exactly at Emma's eye level when she looked down. Maria Rodriguez took her seat in the front row of the gallery, rosary beads wrapped around her trembling fingers. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his stern face softening slightly. "Emma, my name is Judge Harrison. Do you understand why you're here today?" Emma nodded, her voice a whisper, "To tell the truth." "That's right, and you have a friend here to help you feel safe, correct?" Emma looked down at Rex, whose brown eyes met hers with unwavering support. "Yes, Rex is my friend." "Good," Judge Harrison straightened. "Mr. Webb, your objection is preserved. Ms. Martinez, proceed with your questioning when ready. Let's make history today." The trial of Marcus "Spider" Dalton had officially begun. Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez approached the witness stand with the careful movements of someone navigating a minefield. Every instinct honed over 15 years of trial work told her to proceed with extreme caution. Emma Rodriguez sat rigid in the oversized chair, her small hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Her eyes flickered between Martinez and Rex, like a drowning person looking for something, anything, to hold on to. "Emma," Martinez began, her voice as soft as a lullaby, "can you tell the court your full name?" Silence. Emma's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her chest rose and fell with rapid, shallow breaths. The courtroom air felt thick, suffocating. 50 people watched and waited, their collective attention pressing down on the small girl like a physical weight. "It's okay, sweetheart, take your time," Martinez smiled encouragingly. "Can you just tell us your name?" Emma's lips moved, forming shapes without sound. No words emerged. Her eyes grew glassy with unshed tears. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Emma, would it help if you looked at Rex while you answer? Emma's gaze dropped immediately to where Rex sat behind the screen, perfectly still, his brown eyes locked on her face with absolute focus. She stared at him for a long moment, drawing strength from his calm presence. Her mouth opened again. Nothing. Martinez tried a different approach. Emma, I know this is scary, but you're very brave for being here. Can you just nod yes or no for me? Is your name Emma Rodriguez? Emma nodded, a tiny movement of her head. Good, that's very good. Martinez's encouragement felt forced, desperate. And you're 7 years old, correct? Another nod. From the defense table, Marcus Webb leaned back in his chair, barely concealing a satisfied smile. This was going exactly as he'd hoped. A witness who couldn't speak was no witness at all. He caught Judge Harrison's eye, his expression saying clearly, "This is a waste of the court's time." Martinez pressed on, her voice maintaining its gentle tone despite the growing knot of anxiety in her stomach. "Emma, I'm going to show you some pictures. Can you look at them for me?" She held up large photograph cards, images of the convenience store, the candy aisle, the checkout counter. Emma looked at each one, her face growing paler, her breathing more labored. When Martinez showed her a photo of Mr. Chen, Emma's eyes filled with tears that spilled down her cheeks. "It's okay to cry, honey. Mr. Chen is okay now. He's healing." Martinez set down the photos. "Emma, can you tell the court what you were doing at the store that night?" Silence. Emma's tears fell faster now, dripping onto her navy blue dress with the white flowers. Martinez glanced back at Sarah Mitchell, who stood near the courtroom doors with growing concern etched across her face. This wasn't working. Despite all their preparation, despite Rex's presence, the trauma was too strong, the courtroom too intimidating, the memories too overwhelming. "Your Honor," Marcus Webb stood smoothly, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "The defense appreciates the court's accommodation for this child's condition, but it's clear she's unable to provide testimony. Perhaps we should consider that some witnesses, regardless of what they may have seen, are simply not competent to testify in a court of law." "Sit down, Mr. Webb," Judge Harrison commanded sharply. "Ms. Martinez, continue." Martinez turned back to Emma, her mind racing through every technique she'd learned for working with child witnesses. She pulled out a set of colored markers and paper. "Emma, sometimes drawing is easier than talking. Could you draw what you saw that night?" Emma's trembling hand reached for the black marker. She pressed it against the paper and drew a single shape, a spider, just like she had weeks ago with Dr. Gomez. Then her hand froze. The marker clattered to the floor, rolling across the witness box and falling to the ground below. Maria Rodriguez stood halfway up in the gallery, her maternal instinct screaming to rescue her daughter from this torture. The bailiff gestured for her to sit, but Maria's face showed the agony of being forced to watch her child suffer. "Emma, look at me," Martinez said, desperation creeping into her voice despite her best efforts. "You're doing so well, you're so brave. Can you just tell us one thing, just one thing about that night?" Emma shook her head violently, her braids whipping side to side. She looked down at Rex, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She wanted to speak. Everyone in the courtroom could see she wanted to, but the words were trapped, imprisoned by fear and trauma. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. In his 3 decades on the bench, he'd never felt more helpless. The law gave him power over many things, but he couldn't command words to emerge from a traumatized child's throat. Minutes ticked by like hours. Martinez asked simpler questions. Did you see someone come into the store? Was it a man or a woman? Was he tall or short? Each question met with either silence or useless nods that couldn't be recorded by the court reporter, couldn't be entered into evidence, couldn't convict anyone of anything. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Several jurors looked away from Emma, unable to watch her distress. Others frowned with confusion or sympathy. The forewoman, a middle-aged teacher named Patricia Williams, wiped her own eyes discreetly. At the defense table, Marcus Dalton leaned forward, studying Emma with cold, calculating eyes. The spider tattoo on his neck seemed to pulse in the fluorescent courtroom lights. He whispered something to Webb, who nodded and made a note on his legal pad. "Your Honor," Webb stood again, his voice now carrying the weight of inevitability. "The defense renews its motion. This witness, despite the court's extraordinary accommodations, cannot provide competent testimony. The prosecution has had ample time. The child cannot or will not speak. I move that we dismiss this witness and proceed with the rest of the trial." "Your Honor, please," Martinez interjected, her professional composure cracking. "Just a few more minutes. Emma needs—" "What Emma needs," Webb interrupted, his tone sharpening, "is to not be traumatized further by being forced to perform in a courtroom. The defense has every sympathy for this child's condition, but sympathy doesn't override the rules of evidence and procedure." Judge Harrison's jaw tightened. Webb was right, legally speaking. A witness who couldn't speak was functionally the same as no witness at all. The judge could give Martinez more time, but what good would it do? Emma had been on the stand for 45 minutes, and they hadn't gotten a single word of usable testimony. "Ms. Martinez," Judge Harrison said slowly, reluctantly, "I'm going to give you 5 more minutes. If the witness cannot provide verbal testimony in that time, I'll have no choice but to." And then it happened. Emma slipped down from the witness chair. It wasn't a dramatic movement. She simply slid off the booster seat, her small body moving with quiet determination. Her feet touched the floor, and before anyone could react, she walked around the corner of the witness box to where Rex sat behind the screen. "Emma," Martinez called out, confused. "Sweetheart, you need to stay in the witness chair." But Emma wasn't listening to the prosecutor. She wasn't listening to anyone. She dropped to her knees beside Rex and wrapped her thin arms around his neck, pressing her face into his warm fur. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The bailiff moved forward, uncertain whether to intervene. Judge Harrison raised his gavel, then hesitated, lowering it slowly. Sarah Mitchell stepped forward instinctively, then stopped. Something was happening, something important. Emma's small body shook with silent sobs as she clung to Rex. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, his training and his instinct working in harmony. He understood in the way that only animals can, that this child needed him more than she'd ever needed anything. Marcus Webb rose to object, his mouth opening to speak, but Judge Harrison's hand shot up, commanding silence without words. The judge leaned forward, watching intently as Emma's shoulders heaved with emotion. Maria Rodriguez clutched her rosary beads so tightly they left impressions in her palms. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her daughter, broken and hurting, seeking comfort in the only place she could find it, in the unconditional acceptance of a dog who asked nothing of her except to be herself. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked loudly in the sudden quiet. 1 minute passed, then 2. Emma's crying slowly subsided. Her grip on Rex relaxed from desperate to gentle. She stayed there, kneeling on the courtroom floor, her face buried in his fur, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside herself. And then, so quietly that only those closest could hear, Emma began to whisper. Emma's lips moved against Rex's fur, forming words that only the dog could hear. Her breath came in short gasps between syllables, each word a battle won against the fear that had held her captive for weeks. Rex remained motionless, a living statue of patience and support, his warmth anchoring Emma to the present moment even as she reached back into her darkest memories. There was a scary man, Emma breathed into Rex's ear, her voice no louder than a butterfly's wings. The court reporter, Janet Mills, a veteran of 23 years, leaned forward in her chair, her fingers hovering over her stenography machine. She strained to catch the words, her face tight with concentration. She could see Emma's lips moving but couldn't hear anything. Panic flickered across Janet's face. She couldn't record testimony she couldn't hear. Judge Harrison started to lean forward, his mouth opening to instruct the bailiff to help Emma back to the witness chair. But Detective Sarah Mitchell, standing near the sidebar, held up her hand urgently, her index finger to her lips. "Wait," her gesture said. "Just wait." Sarah could see what the others couldn't. Emma was speaking. Actually speaking. After weeks of silence, the words were coming, even if they were only whispers. Sarah had worked enough cases with traumatized victims to know that sometimes you had to let testimony emerge in unconventional ways, or it wouldn't emerge at all. Prosecutor Martinez slowly, carefully, lowered herself to her knees about 6 feet from Emma and Rex. She didn't want to startle the child, didn't want to break whatever fragile connection had formed. "Emma," Martinez said softly, keeping her voice gentle and non-threatening, "can you tell Rex what you saw? Rex really wants to know what happened." Emma's whisper grew fractionally louder, enough that Martinez could now catch fragments. "Came into the store, scary, shouting." "That's good, Emma, you're doing so good," Martinez encouraged, her heart pounding. "What did the scary man look like? Can you tell Rex?" Emma pulled back slightly from Rex's fur, her tear-stained face now visible. Her eyes remained locked on the dog's brown eyes, as if drawing courage directly from his gaze. Her voice, still barely above a whisper, began to strengthen word by word. He was really tall, taller than Mommy, taller than the door." Emma's small hand gestured vaguely, still resting on Rex's neck. "He wore a black mask on his face, but I could see his eyes. They were mean eyes, dark and mean." The courtroom had gone so quiet that people were afraid to breathe. Janet Mills frantically adjusted her equipment, catching what she could. Judge Harrison leaned so far forward he was practically lying on his bench. The jurors sat frozen, straining to hear every precious word. Martinez inched slightly closer. "What else did you see, Emma? What was the scary man wearing?" "A jacket," Emma said, her voice growing marginally stronger as she focused on Rex's reassuring presence. "A black jacket with metal things on it, spiky things, and it was torn. There was a rip on the sleeve." She touched her own arm to demonstrate. "Right here." Marcus Dalton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his attorney gripping his forearm in warning. "Don't react," Webb's grip said. "Don't give them anything." "Emma, you're being so brave," Martinez said, her voice thick with emotion. "Did you see anything else? Anything special about the scary man?" Emma's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she didn't look away from Rex. "He had a spider," she whispered, then louder, "a big black spider on his neck, right here." She touched the left side of her own neck. "It had 8 legs and they went up like they were climbing. I counted them, 8 legs." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Harrison's gavel came down once sharply. "Order, complete silence or I'll clear this courtroom." "The spider was moving when he yelled," Emma continued, her words coming faster now, tumbling out like water through a breaking dam. "He came in and he was so loud. He said bad words. He told everybody to get down. He said this word and the D word. Mommy covered my ears, but I still heard." Maria Rodriguez sobbed openly in the gallery, her hand pressed against her mouth. "Mr. Chen tried to give him the money," Emma's voice cracked with pain. "Mr. Chen is nice. He always gives me extra gummy bears. He was trying to open the register, but his hands were shaking. The scary man got mad. He grabbed Mr. Chen and threw him. There was breaking glass everywhere. And blood. So much blood on Mr. Chen's shirt." Emma's grip on Rex tightened, her small fingers digging into his fur. Rex leaned into her, providing steady, silent support. His training kept him still, but his eyes showed understanding, compassion, connection. "Did the scary man say anything else, Emma?" Martinez asked gently, knowing they were approaching the crucial moment. "Did he say anything before he left?" Emma nodded against Rex's neck. He said if Mr. Chen told the police he would come back. He said he would hurt him. He kicked the counter really hard with his boot. It made a loud bang. I was so scared. Mommy was holding me, but I was so scared, Rex. I thought he was going to hurt us too. I know you were scared, sweetheart. Anyone would be scared. Martinez paused, then asked the most important question of all. Emma, did you see the scary man's face, even with the mask? Emma's eyes grew distant, traveling back to that terrible night. When he was leaving, she said, her voice suddenly clear enough that even the jury could hear, the mask moved. It slipped down a little bit. I saw his face. He had a scar, a white line right under his eye. She traced a line on her own cheek. And his teeth were yellow, and he had mean eyes, so mean. Emma, Martinez said carefully, knowing this was the moment everything hinged on, is that man here, in this courtroom right now? Emma finally lifted her head fully from Rex's fur. She looked around the courtroom, her eyes scanning the faces. When her gaze landed on the defense table, on Marcus Spider Dalton sitting in his ill-fitting suit, her entire body went rigid. That's him, she whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. That man right there, with the spider on his neck, that's the scary man from the store. The courtroom exploded. Reporters scribbled frantically. Jury members leaned forward. Marcus Dalton's face drained of color, the spider tattoo standing out starkly against his suddenly pale skin. Order, Judge Harrison's gavel cracked like lightning. I will have order. Marcus Webb shot to his feet, objection forming on his lips, but Emma wasn't finished. She turned back to Rex, both hands cupping his face now, looking directly into his eyes with an intensity that silenced even the defense attorney. Rex, Emma said, her voice ringing clear as a bell through the hushed courtroom, loud enough now that no one had to strain to hear, you're so brave. You help people even when scary things happen. You catch bad people and you keep us safe. You're my best friend now. Then Emma did something that would be remembered in that courtroom forever. She leaned her forehead against Rex's forehead, nose to nose, and said in a voice filled with wonder and gratitude, Rex makes me brave too. He told me it's okay to tell the truth. He told me the scary man can't hurt me anymore because Rex won't let him. Judge Robert Harrison, who had presided over murders, rapes, assaults, and every dark crime humanity could devise, who had maintained stern judicial composure through 3 decades of human tragedy, felt his eyes fill with tears. He removed his glasses with a trembling hand and wiped his face, not caring who saw. Several jurors openly cried. The forewoman, Patricia Williams, pressed her hand against her heart. Even the bailiff, a former Marine who'd seen combat in Afghanistan, had to turn away to compose himself. Sarah Mitchell felt tears streaming down her own face. She'd believed Rex could help, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. And Marcus Webb, the expensive defense attorney who'd won dozens of impossible cases, sat down slowly, knowing in that moment that nothing he could say or do would erase what the jury had just witnessed. The truth, spoken by a 7-year-old girl to a dog who'd given her back her voice, was the most powerful testimony he'd ever heard. Judge Harrison struggled to speak, his voice rough with emotion. Let the record show, he managed, stopping mid-sentence as he looked at Emma still holding Rex, at the courage blooming in her small frame, at the pure honesty shining in her tear-filled eyes. He had to stop. He couldn't continue. The words caught in his throat as the full weight of the moment crashed over him. This little girl, this brave, broken, beautiful little girl, had just changed everything. Judge Robert Harrison sat frozen on the bench, his mouth half open, the words he'd been about to speak dissolving into silence. His hand trembled as he set down his gavel, the sound echoing through the courtroom like a final punctuation mark on something profound and irreversible. For 30 years, he'd prided himself on maintaining absolute judicial composure. He'd heard confessions of unspeakable crimes, watched victims collapse under the weight of their trauma, seen families torn apart by violence and grief. And through it all, he'd remained the unmovable pillar of authority and reason. But this moment, this small girl clutching a German shepherd, speaking truth with such pure, unvarnished honesty, had shattered something inside him. The courtroom held its collective breath, watching their stern, unshakable judge wipe tears from his eyes with the back of his hand. Judge Harrison tried to speak again, his voice cracking. "Let the record show that the witness has identified." He stopped, couldn't continue. His throat closed around the words. Emma still knelt on the floor with Rex, but now she looked up at the judge with concern in her young eyes. "Are you sad?" she asked, her newly found voice clear and steady. "Don't be sad. Rex says it's okay to be sad sometimes. Rex says crying means you have a big heart." That did it. Judge Harrison actually laughed through his tears, a sound so unexpected that several people in the courtroom jumped. He removed his glasses completely, set them on the bench, and pressed his hands against his face for a moment, collecting himself. When he looked up again, his eyes were red, but his expression was softer than anyone had ever seen it. "Young lady," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are absolutely right, and Rex is a very wise friend." He cleared his throat, attempting to regain some semblance of judicial authority. "Let the record show that the witness, Emma Rodriguez, has positively identified the defendant, Marcus Dalton, as the perpetrator of the robbery at Chen's corner store." Marcus Webb sprang to his feet like a jack-in-the-box, his earlier confidence replaced by desperate urgency. "Your Honor, objection. This entire proceeding has been highly irregular and prejudicial to my client. The witness's testimony was given while sitting on the floor, speaking to a dog, in a state of obvious emotional distress. This cannot be considered reliable evidence." Judge Harrison's eyes hardened, his moment of vulnerability passing into something fiercer, protective anger. "Mr. Webb, that child just provided the most honest, detailed testimony I've heard in 3 decades on this bench. She identified your client with absolute certainty. Your objection is noted and overruled." "But Your Honor," Webb pressed, his voice rising. "I said overruled, Counselor." Judge Harrison's gavel came down with finality. "Unless you have evidence that the witness is lying or mistaken, which I seriously doubt given the specificity of her testimony, your client has been identified. Sit down." Webb remained standing, his jaw clenched, his mind racing through legal options. "Your Honor, I request a recess to consult with my client about." "Request denied. Ms. Martinez, do you have further questions for this witness?" Martinez, still kneeling near Emma and Rex, shook her head. "No, Your Honor. The prosecution rests its direct examination." "Mr. Webb, you may cross-examine." Judge Harrison's tone carried a warning. "Be gentle or face my wrath." Webb approached slowly, his expensive shoes clicking against the courtroom floor. He knew he had to discredit Emma's testimony somehow, but the optics were terrible. Cross-examining a traumatized 7-year-old who just broken down in tears would make him look like a monster to the jury. Still, it was his job to defend his client, no matter how guilty that client clearly was. "Emma," Webb began, forcing his voice into something approximating gentleness, "you were very scared that night, weren't you?" Emma looked up at him from her position on the floor, still holding Rex. "Yes." "And when people are very scared, sometimes they don't remember things correctly, right? Sometimes their memory plays tricks on them." "Objection," Martinez called out, leading the witness. "I'll allow it," Judge Harrison said. "Answer the question, Emma." Emma frowned, thinking carefully. "I remember everything," she said simply. "I remember because I was so scared. I remember the spider's 8 legs. I remember the rip in his jacket. I remember his mean eyes and the white scar. I remember it was him." She pointed again at Marcus Dalton. Dalton shifted in his seat, his hands clenching into fists. The spider tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe as his jaw muscles worked with barely contained rage. Webb tried another approach. "Emma, did the police show you pictures before today? Did they tell you who to identify?" "Mr. Webb," Judge Harrison warned, his voice dangerous, "tread very carefully." No, Emma answered before Webb could rephrase. Detective Sarah only showed me the store. She didn't show me people. I knew him when I saw him because of the spider. Her voice grew stronger, more confident. And because of his mean eyes. They're the same mean eyes from that night. Webb looked back at the jury. Several members were glaring at him with open hostility. The forewoman, Patricia Williams, had her arms crossed, her expression making it abundantly clear what she thought of his line of questioning. "No further questions," Webb said abruptly, returning to his seat. There was nothing else he could do. Every question he asked only made Emma more credible, more sympathetic, more believable. "Redirect Ms. Martinez," Judge Harrison asked. Martinez stood, brushing off her knees. "Just one question, Your Honor." She looked at Emma with gentle warmth. "Emma, are you telling the truth today?" "Yes," Emma said without hesitation. "Rex told me that telling the truth is always the right thing to do, even when it's scary, even when the bad man is looking at me." She glanced at Dalton, then quickly back to Rex. "But I'm not scared anymore, because Rex is here. And because telling the truth means the bad man can't hurt Mr. Chen again or anybody else." "Thank you, Emma. You're the bravest person I know." Martinez's voice cracked with emotion. "No further questions." Judge Harrison nodded. "Emma, you may step down. Detective Mitchell, please escort the witness from the courtroom." Sarah moved forward quickly, Rex standing and positioning himself between Emma and the defense table as they exited. Emma walked with her hand on Rex's back, her head held higher than when she'd entered. As they passed the jury box, Emma turned and waved shyly at the jurors. Patricia Williams waved back, tears streaming down her face. The moment the courtroom door closed behind Emma, Rex, and Detective Mitchell, the gallery erupted in whispers. Judge Harrison allowed it for a moment before bringing down his gavel. "Order. We'll take a 15-minute recess before closing arguments." As everyone stood for the judge's exit, Marcus Webb leaned close to his client. "That was a disaster," he hissed. "That kid just buried you." Marcus Dalton's face twisted with fury. "She's just a kid. Who's the jury going to believe?" "Everyone," Webb interrupted flatly. "They're going to believe everyone except you. That child just gave the most powerful testimony I've ever heard. And that moment when the judge stopped mid-sentence because he was too emotional to speak. The jury will remember that forever. We're going to lose." In the hallway outside, Emma sat on a bench with her mother and Rex, drinking juice from a box that a kind paralegal had brought her. Maria held her daughter close, whispering prayers of gratitude in Spanish. Emma looked up at Detective Sarah. "Did I do good?" she asked. "Did I help Mr. Chen?" Sarah knelt down, fresh tears in her eyes. "Emma, you did more than good. You were amazing. You were brave and strong and honest. You did exactly what needed to be done." Emma smiled, then leaned against Rex. "Rex helped me," she said. "He's my best friend now. He gave me my words back." Rex's tail wagged slowly, and he rested his head on Emma's lap. Sarah Mitchell knew in that moment that she would never forget this case, this child, this dog, or the judge who'd stopped mid-sentence because the truth was simply too beautiful and terrible to witness without feeling its full weight. Justice, real justice, didn't always look like what the law books described. Sometimes it looked like a little girl and a German shepherd finding courage together in the face of darkness. Sometimes it looked exactly like this. The jury deliberated for exactly 92 minutes. Court observers who'd covered trials for decades said they'd never seen a jury return so quickly with such serious charges. When the forewoman, Patricia Williams, stood to deliver the verdict, her voice was steady and clear, carrying the weight of 12 citizens who had witnessed something extraordinary. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus Dalton, guilty of armed robbery in the first degree, guilty of aggravated assault, guilty on all counts." Marcus Dalton's head dropped. Marcus Webb gathered his papers in silence, already mentally preparing the appeal he knew would go nowhere. Judge Harrison accepted the verdict with a single nod, his face grave but satisfied. "Mr. Dalton," the judge said, his voice resonating through the courtroom, "you will be remanded into custody pending sentencing. This court stands adjourned." In the hallway outside, Emma sat on Maria's lap, still wearing her navy blue dress with white flowers, now wrinkled from the day's events. When Detective Sarah emerged with the news, Emma looked up with questioning eyes. "Did we win?" she asked softly. "Is Mr. Chen safe now?" Sarah knelt down, her hand resting on Rex's head. "Yes, Emma, you won. The bad man is going to jail for a very long time. He can't hurt anyone anymore. You did that, you and Rex." Emma's face transformed with relief and pride. She hugged Rex tightly around his neck. "We did it, Rex, we helped." Rex's tail wagged, and he licked Emma's cheek gently, making her giggle, a sound her mother hadn't heard in over a month. Maria Rodriguez burst into tears again, but these were tears of joy, of release, of a burden finally lifted. But the story didn't end there. It was really just beginning. 3 days after the verdict, Judge Harrison did something unprecedented. He called a press conference at the courthouse, standing behind a podium with Detective Mitchell and Rex at his side. News cameras from across Texas crowded the steps as the stern judge who'd spent 30 years avoiding media attention spoke directly to the cameras. "What I witnessed in my courtroom last week changed me," Harrison began, his voice carrying across the gathered reporters. "A traumatized child found her voice because of a dog, a certified trained comfort animal who gave her the courage to speak truth. Emma Rodriguez's testimony wouldn't have been possible without K9 Rex. And I realized that there are hundreds, maybe thousands of cases across this state and this country where victims, especially children, are too traumatized to testify." He paused, looking down at Rex, who sat at perfect attention. "I'm announcing my retirement from the bench, effective immediately. But I'm not retiring from public service. I'm dedicating the remainder of my career to establishing a statewide program to place certified comfort dogs in every major courthouse in Texas. These animals can bridge the gap between trauma and testimony, between silence and justice." The reporters erupted with questions, but Judge Harrison raised his hand. "I'm calling this initiative Emma's Voice Project. Every child deserves the chance that Emma Rodriguez had, the chance to be heard, to be believed, to see justice done. Every victim deserves that chance." Within 6 weeks, Judge Harrison had partnered with trauma specialists, K9 training organizations, and victim advocacy groups. Within 6 months, the Texas legislature introduced House Bill 2847, commonly known as Emma's Law, which provided state funding for courthouse facility dogs and established protocols for their use in testimony situations. The bill passed unanimously. By the end of the year, 15 Texas courthouses had certified comfort dogs. Within 2 years, the number grew to 43. Other states began adopting similar programs, using Emma's case as the blueprint for trauma-informed justice. But for Emma herself, healing was a slower, more personal journey. Judge Harrison personally arranged for her to continue therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Gomez, with Rex present at every single appointment. Detective Mitchell brought Rex to Emma's house twice a week for the first 3 months, then once a week, then gradually less frequently as Emma's confidence grew and her nightmares faded. 6 months after the trial, Emma returned to school. She still had hard days, moments when the memories would surge back, but she'd learned tools to cope. And whenever she felt scared, she'd close her eyes and imagine Rex's warm brown eyes, his steady presence, his unwavering support. Mr. Chen recovered fully from his injuries. The day he reopened his store, Emma and her mother were his first customers. He gave Emma the biggest bag of gummy bears she'd ever seen, and when she tried to tell him about the trial, about Rex, about finding her courage, the elderly man simply pulled her into a gentle hug. "You brave girl," he said, his accented English thick with emotion. "So brave, I'm so proud of you." Marcus Spider Dalton was sentenced to 23 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He filed multiple appeals, all denied. The spider tattoo that had once been a symbol of intimidation became Evidence Exhibit A, photographed and catalogued, a permanent reminder that monsters can be identified and justice can prevail. 2 years after the trial, Emma attended a very special ceremony at the Millbrook Police Department. Rex, now 7 years old and nearing retirement from active duty, was being awarded the department's Medal of Valor, the first time the award had ever been given to a K-9 officer for victim services rather than tactical operations. Emma, now 9 years old and thriving in 4th grade, stood at the podium with a speech she'd written herself. Her voice was strong, confident, carrying none of the fear that had once imprisoned it. "Rex saved my words," Emma read from her carefully printed paper. "When the scary man took them away, Rex helped me find them again. He showed me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Rex is a hero, not because he catches bad guys, even though he does that too, but because he catches broken hearts and helps them heal." The room erupted in applause. Detective Sarah Mitchell, standing beside Rex on the stage, openly cried. The police chief had to pause the ceremony for a full minute while people composed themselves. After the medal was pinned to Rex's collar, Judge Harrison, now Mr. Harrison, private citizen and full-time advocate, stepped forward with another announcement. Rex would be officially retiring from police work and would be adopted by Detective Mitchell as her personal pet. But he would continue working part-time as a certified therapy dog for the Emma's Voice Project, helping other traumatized children find their courage. Emma ran to Rex and hugged him fiercely. "You're going to help so many kids," she whispered into his fur, "just like you helped me." That evening, Emma sat at her kitchen table working on a new project, a children's book she was writing with her mother's help, titled Rex Saved My Words. It would tell the story of a little girl who lost her voice and a brave dog who helped her find it again. The book would eventually be published by a small press and distributed to children's hospitals and trauma centers across the country. But Emma's favorite part of the day wasn't the ceremony or the medal or even the cake her abuela had baked. It was the quiet moment afterward, sitting in Detective Sarah's backyard, throwing a tennis ball for Rex while he fetched it with the enthusiasm of a puppy, his medal glinting in the afternoon sun. "Thank you, Rex," Emma said, watching him bound back with the ball. "Thank you for being my best friend when I needed one. Thank you for teaching me that my voice matters, that the truth matters, that I matter." Rex dropped the ball at her feet and sat, his brown eyes meeting hers with that same steady, loving gaze that had first broken through her trauma 2 years ago. His tail wagged slowly, and in that moment, no words were necessary. Emma had learned something profound through her journey with Rex, something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. Courage was a 7-year-old girl and a German shepherd, standing together against darkness and choosing truth over silence. Courage was finding your voice when the world tried to steal it. Courage was a little girl who became a hero, and a dog who showed her how. 5 years later, Emma Rodriguez stood before the Texas state legislature as they honored her on the 5th anniversary of Emma's Law. Now 12 years old, she'd helped over 300 children through the Emma's Voice Project, visiting them with Rex, sharing her story, showing them that healing was possible. "I'm not special," Emma told the assembled legislators, her voice clear and strong. "I was just a scared little girl who got help from an amazing dog, but now I use my voice to help others find theirs. That's what Rex taught me, that we all have a responsibility to speak up for those who can't, to stand up for what's right, to be brave even when we're scared." She paused, looking out at the crowd, and to remember that sometimes the best friend you'll ever have has 4 paws and a heart bigger than any human could ever understand. Rex, now retired and gray around the muzzle but still dignified and wise, sat beside Emma on the legislative floor, his presence a living testament to the power of compassion, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a traumatized child and the dog who gave her back her voice. And somewhere in a prison cell, Marcus Spider, Dalton learned that the little girl he'd tried to silence had become the loudest voice for justice reform in the entire state. Emma Rodriguez had found her voice, and she was never, ever going to be silent again. The end.